The theory goes on that Rigdon met Joseph Smith sometime between 1826 and 1827. They conspired to produce the Book of Mormon using Spalding's manuscript. And Smith was to be the front man, and Smith was to be the translator, and Rigdon was supposed to be the spokesperson or spokesman and gatherer of Israel. That's the theory. Now, the manuscript is missing. Nobody has ever seen this manuscript. It's just based on the witness testimony. And the one that survives by this theory is not the manuscript in question. Now, the Mormon, the apologetic response is that the manuscript that is extant is the manuscript in question, but we'll get to that. Okay, what's the background? How did all this get started? In 1832, Orson Hyde and Samuel Smith, Mel's progenitor, were proselyting in Conneaut, Ohio. And while they were there were several citizens that protested that the Mormons were preaching from Spalding's writings. Mainly you had Book of Mormon names and places and narrative. We'll talk a little bit about that. Oops, want to go forward. It created quite a furor, and there was great excitement in the area as the word spread. Along came Dr. Philastus Hurlbut. Interesting name. Doctor was his given name and not a medical title. He converted in early 1833 and he immediately went on a mission to the northeastern Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York area. And he became aware on this mission of this Conneaut controversy and he became skeptical of Joseph Smith's claims. This and perhaps for other reasons, I don't know. Anyway, he was excommunicated in June after his mission on charges of immorality that occurred while he was on his mission. And he became determined to expose Mormonism. And he went to Conneaut. He heard about that, of course, on his mission. And so he went up there and he gathered affidavits from the citizens. He also, a citizens committee backed Spalding financially, and he traveled out to Massachusetts, where the widow of Spalding was now residing. Her name was Mrs. Davison at the time. She had been since remarried and divorced, living with her daughter in Massachusetts. So he went out there and he retrieved from her a manuscript. But it was observed that when he read it, that it didn't match the testimony of the Conneaut citizens. So he went back to Conneaut and he verified that the one he had recovered was not the same manuscripts that the citizens had remembered. Important point though is in April of 34 he was tried over threats on Joseph Smith's life, and he was released with a promise to keep the peace, and he left based on a security deposit. He left the area and he just kind of lost interest in the whole project. But he turned everything over, his affidavits and all his information and the manuscript that he had recovered from Spalding's widow, to Eber D. Howe, and he departed the area. And Eber D. Howe, I'm sure you've heard of. He's the owner-editor of the Painesville, Ohio Telegraph, and you can see where that is. It's just right close to Kirtland there. And he was doing his own research, and that's why Philastus Hurlbut turned this stuff over to him, because he'd heard about his research. And he was determined to expose Mormonism, but he incorporated Hurlbut's findings in his own book, which was Mormonism Unveiled. You probably heard this. This was the first anti-Mormon book published. And 3 of the 19 chapters used Hurlbut's information. And he said, I published only a small part of the statements Hurlbut let me have. And none of these statements are extant. They were believed to be destroyed in the Painesville Telegraph office fire in 1841. So we don't have any of this original information. We just know it on the basis of E.D. Howe's book, Mormonism Unveiled. He speculated that Rigdon had acquired and modified Spalding's manuscript from the beginning, from about the middle of 1831 on. There were newspapermen that were writing articles speculating that Rigdon was involved with the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So that was common speculation at the time. And he presumed the manuscript that Rigdon used was missing, and that it was based primarily on the fact that several of the citizens, specifically four of the witnesses, claimed that it was entitled Manuscript Found. The one he had retrieved from Spalding's widow, that was Hurlbut retrieved, was entitled Manuscript Story Conneaut Creek. So I want to quickly look at just what the witnesses said. It's very important. I've labeled the witnesses 1 through 9 across the top here, 1 through 9. And down here, here's a list of the witnesses. It runs from John Spalding, which was Solomon's brother. Martha Spalding was John Spalding's wife. Oliver Smith was a landlord. Nathan Howard was a neighbor and a friend. Aaron Wright was a neighbor and friend. Henry Lake was a business partner. John Miller was an employee, and he also boarded with the Spaldings. Artemis Cunningham was a creditor. And then finally, Spalding's widow, Mrs. Matilda Davison. So those were the initial witnesses that E.D. Howe published on. Okay, 4 of the witnesses, the X's mean, okay, 4 of them identified the manuscript. It was entitled Manuscript Found. It's not important which one said which, but just notice that 4 out of the 9 had that detail. 3 of them mentioned that the ancient record was buried locally. The red mark indicates that she had provided this evidence later. We'll talk about that in a bit. All the witnesses, it was a historical romance accounting for the first settlers of America. Most of them remembered that the manuscript covered American Indians descended from lost tribes who journeyed from Jerusalem. 1 remembered it was to escape judgment. A number of them remembered that it accounted for the ancient civilizations, arts, sciences, culture, and customs and laws, that is in American Indians. Well, it's interesting that 4 of the witnesses remembered the names Nephi and Lehi, and 1 just remembered the name Nephi. That's what the N means. 1 remembered other characters. 1 remembered Laban, and 1 remembered Moroni. Now this was again in Spalding's manuscript. 2 of them remembered that there were 2 nations, Nephites that were enlightened and Lamanites that were warlike. 4 of them remembered that there was incessant warfare, great multitudes slain, buried the dead in large heaps and mounds. 1 witness remembered that they arrived at a location called Zarahemla, which was near Panama, today's Panama, and that they later migrated to the northeast, to North America. 3 of the witnesses said it was written in Old Style English. And 3 of the witnesses said he frequently used the phrase, and it came to pass. In fact, friends and neighbors affectionately called Spalding old came to pass. And 3 said there was no Mormon theology. Although it did have biblical theology, it didn't have any Mormon theology. So the relevance of showing it this way is one of the criticisms we'll get to is that the witnesses were coached and cajoled and prompted because so much of what they remembered was common, the same. Well, I would argue that actually there's quite a bit of variance in what the witnesses remembered. You could argue that point either way, actually. Okay, Matilda Davison lived in Massachusetts. She was interviewed by a Reverend Austin, David Austin, at the bequest of another Reverend Storrs. And this Reverend Austin documented this interview, and Matilda signed the document. And in that document it said, she said, the Book of Mormon derived from Spalding's writings. My husband had a vivid imagination and great passion and fondness for history. The discovery of ancient artifacts and local Indian mounds stimulated Solomon's interest in writing an historical sketch of this lost race for amusement. So he started out writing it for amusement, and it later turned into a business venture based on other witnesses. It was written in the ancient style of the Old Testament. Again, she was one of the 3 witnesses that said it was written in Old English style. And she said that neighbors and family would often come in from time to time to hear portions read to them, It was entitled Manuscript Found. She was one of 4 that identified it that way. After moving to Pittsburgh, she said, we submitted to Spalding submitted to Mr. Patterson's firm for publication. And she said it was pending creation of a title page and preface, that the manuscript was done, that they requested this information.